People will beg you to go back, not because they love you more, but because your transformation unsettles them. When you were drinking from the same cup they were drinking from, everything felt equal. No one felt exposed. No one felt pressured to change. But the moment you stopped, the mirror showed up. Your growth became a silent accusation, not because you said anything, but because your life did. Your discipline highlighted their delay. Your clarity exposed their confusion, and instead of changing themselves, they try to pull you back. They will disguise their begging as concern. They will say you're isolating yourself, that you've become distant, that you're taking things too seriously. They'll remind you of the old days, the laughs, the shared struggles, the memories that once bonded you. But what they're really saying is, come back so I don't have to face what I'm avoiding. Your absence from their patterns forces them to sit alone with their choices. And that discomfort is louder than any sermon. Misery loves company, but stagnation demands it. When you leave a level, those who stay behind feel abandoned, even though you didn't leave them. You left what was destroying you, yet they interpret your obedience as rejection. So they beg, not realizing that what they're asking for is spiritual suicide for you. They don't feel the weight of what God has placed on your life. They don't hear the warnings you hear. They don't feel the conviction that stops you from casually returning. They just want the old version of you because that version didn't challenge them. Some people only know how to relate to you through dysfunction. As long as you were broken together, the relationship felt safe. But healing changes the dynamic. When you grow, the relationship either evolves or expires. And for those unwilling to grow, expiration feels like loss. So they try to resuscitate the old version of you. They beg you to drink again so the relationship can go back to what it was, even if what it was slowly killing you. Your transformation removes their excuses. They can no longer say change is impossible when they see it in you. They can no longer blame circumstances when you rose from the same conditions. So instead of being inspired, they feel threatened. And rather than asking how you did it, they ask you to stop doing it. They mock your discipline, minimize your convictions, and label your obedience as extremism, all to protect their comfort. The pressure is rarely aggressive, it's emotional. It's guilt wrapped in familiarity. It's loyalty weaponized against purpose. After all we've been through, they say, don't forget where you came from, but remembering where you came from doesn't mean living there. Gratitude doesn't require regression. Honor doesn't demand self-destruction. You can love people deeply and still refuse to join them in places God delivered you from. They beg because your presence used to justify their behavior. When you were involved, it felt normal. When you stepped away, it felt exposed. Your sobriety in the spirit disrupted their comfort. And instead of seeking the same freedom, they seek your participation. But chosen ones must understand this truth. Not everyone who begs you to stay is meant to go with you. Some people are assigned to a season, not a lifetime. And when the season ends, obedience requires separation, even when it hurts. Saying no is one of the most misunderstood acts of obedience because people often mistake it for pride, fear, or weakness. But in truth, a holy no is evidence of strength under control. It is not the absence of love, it is the presence of wisdom. When God teaches you to say no, He is not shrinking your life, He is shielding it. Boundaries are not walls to keep people out. They are gates to keep purpose in. Many people say yes because they are afraid of being misunderstood. They say yes to avoid conflict, to keep peace, to maintain access, or to preserve relationships that God is quietly trying to prune. But peace that requires self-betrayal is not peace at all. It is pressure disguised as harmony. Obedience will sometimes make you look unreasonable to those who benefit from your lack of boundaries. When you stop saying yes to everything, people who were comfortable crossing your limits will suddenly feel offended. A disciplined no is not emotional, it is intentional. It is the result of discernment, not impulse. Weakness reacts, wisdom responds. When you are rooted in obedience, you no longer need to explain every refusal. Your spirit knows when something is misaligned, and that knowing is enough. You don't owe access to everyone who requests it. Access is earned through alignment, not familiarity. Some doors must remain closed, not because what's behind them is evil, but because it is distracting. Not every opportunity deserves your energy. Not every relationship deserves your availability. Chosen ones understand that time, focus, and spiritual clarity are sacred resources. Every yes costs you something, and every no protects something. The question is never whether you will pay a price, but which price you are willing to pay. People often label obedience as rigidity because it exposes their flexibility. They call discipline extreme because it challenges their comfort. But obedience is not about rules, it is about relationship. When you know the voice of God, you don't need external validation to confirm your choices. You are not trying to please the crowd. You are trying to remain aligned with the call. And alignment sometimes requires standing alone. A no spoken in obedience carries more power than a yes spoken in fear. Fear-based yeses lead to resentment, burnout, and spiritual confusion. Obedient no's lead to clarity, peace, and direction. You may lose access to certain circles, but you gain authority in the realm God assigned you to. And authority is always more valuable than popularity. God often reveals your maturity through what you decline, not what you accept. Anyone can say yes when it feels good. It takes wisdom to say no when it looks beneficial, but feels wrong. That inner restraint is not weakness, it is mastery. It is proof that you are no longer ruled by impulse, approval, or nostalgia. You are led by conviction. Chosen ones are not called to be agreeable. They are called to be obedient. And obedience will require you to disappoint people who are accustomed to having access to you. But disappointing people is sometimes the cost of not disappointing God. When your no is rooted in obedience, it becomes an act of worship, a declaration that your life is governed by purpose, not pressure. When clarity enters your life, it doesn't just change you, it changes how others experience you. The peace you carry, the discipline you practice, and the boundaries you uphold become unsettling to people who are still comfortable in chaos, not because you are doing anything wrong, but because your stability highlights what they have been avoiding. Your presence becomes a contrast, and contrast makes people uncomfortable. Chaos thrives in noise, distraction, and emotional turbulence. When someone lives in constant disorder, they learn to normalize it. They call it passion, personality, or circumstance. But when you arrive with calm decision-making, consistent behavior, and emotional restraint, it disrupts that normalization. Suddenly their excuses feel weaker, their reactions look exaggerated, their patterns feel exposed, and instead of adjusting themselves, they often try to label you as cold, distant, judgmental. Discipline has a way of revealing the cost of undisciplined living. When you wake up early, guard your time, manage your emotions, and refuse unnecessary drama, it quietly confronts those who rely on excuses. You don't have to say a word for your life to preach. Your consistency becomes a mirror, and mirrors don't argue, they reveal. That revelation can either inspire change or provoke resistance. Peace is especially offensive to people who survive on emotional intensity. Some individuals confuse chaos with connection. They bond through complaining, reacting, and constant crisis. When you no longer participate in that cycle, the dynamic breaks. They may accuse you of being detached or uninterested, but in reality, you have simply stopped feeding the disorder. You didn't withdraw love, you withdrew agreement with dysfunction. Your clarity forces questions people are not ready to answer. Why are you no longer reactive? Why do you no longer entertain certain conversations? Why don't you chase what everyone else is chasing? These unspoken questions create tension, and tension often turns into criticism. It's easier to mock your discipline than to examine their own lack of it. It's easier to minimize your peace than to confront their inner turmoil. This discomfort is not your responsibility to fix. You are not called to dilute your obedience to make others feel comfortable. Growth will always create distance from those committed to stagnation. That distance is not rejection, it is alignment, and alignment often feels like separation before it feels like freedom. Some people only feel validated when others share their chaos. When you step out of it, they feel exposed, as if your clarity implies that another way of living is possible. And that implication threatens the stories they tell themselves to stay the same, so they push back. They pressure you to relax, to loosen up, to stop being so disciplined. But what they are really asking is for you to dim your light, so they don't have to face the darkness they've grown used to. Clarity also changes your reactions. You no longer respond emotionally to everything, and that can frustrate people who are used to controlling situations through emotional escalation. When drama no longer works on you, it loses power, and people who depended on that power will feel disarmed. They may interpret your calm as indifference, but it is actually self-mastery. The truth is, peace makes noise in chaotic spaces. It challenges patterns without confrontation. It questions norms without words. And not everyone is ready for that. But chosen ones must understand that being misunderstood is often a side effect of being aligned. You are not here to be comfortable to everyone. You are here to be faithful to what God is doing in you, even when your clarity unsettles those who refuse to seek their own. There are things you simply cannot return to once God has pulled you out, because what once felt normal will now become dangerous. What used to satisfy you will now slowly destroy you. That old way of thinking, that old environment, that old circle, that old habit, it didn't change, but you did, and that's the problem. You are no longer built to survive on what used to feed a broken version of you. When God elevates you, He also sensitizes you. What you once tolerated without conviction will now disturb your peace. What you once laughed at will now grieve your spirit. What you once drank freely will now make you sick. People don't always understand this shift. They assume you are being dramatic, prideful, or overly spiritual, but the truth is growth brings intolerance for poison. A healed person cannot casually revisit what once wounded them. A delivered person cannot play with the chains they were once bound by. You didn't change because you wanted to feel superior. You changed because survival demanded transformation. God didn't pull you out just to prove He could. He pulled you out because staying there would have killed you. There are environments that once felt like home but are now hostile to your calling. Conversations that once felt harmless now drain you. Patterns you once justified now trigger warning signals in your spirit. And it's not because those things suddenly became evil. It's because you are no longer aligned with them. When your identity shifts, your tolerance changes. You can't grow spiritually and still drink emotionally from the same broken wells. You can't walk in clarity while feeding on confusion. You can't carry purpose while consuming distraction. The danger is that nostalgia will try to convince you that one small return won't hurt. It will whisper that you're strong enough now, mature enough now, disciplined enough now, but strength doesn't mean immunity. In fact, the higher your calling, the greater the cost of compromise. What once only bruised you can now break you because you have more to lose. Your peace is more valuable now. Your clarity is sharper now. Your assignment is heavier now. God removes certain appetites on purpose. He doesn't just take you out of places, He takes the taste away. So when you find yourself no longer enjoying what you once craved, that is not loss. It is protection. That is evidence that God rewired you. You're not boring. You're sober. You're not distant, you're discerning. You're not cold, you're guarded. And guarded people live longer spiritually. Returning to old habits doesn't just affect you, it confuses your spirit, it blurs your vision, it dulls your sensitivity. You may still function, but you won't flow. You may still attend, but you won't advance. That's why God is strict with chosen ones. He doesn't allow casual compromise because your life is not casual. There are people connected to your obedience who will never know your name, but they will feel the impact of your discipline. What once sustained you was a coping mechanism, not a calling. You drank from it because you didn't know who you were yet, but now that you know, going back would be self-betrayal, and God will always disrupt what threatens the future He showed you. He's not punishing you by saying no. He's preserving you because some cups are survivable at one level but fatal at another, and you are no longer where you used to be. Being chosen does not mean living without temptation. It means living with responsibility. When God places an assignment on your life, He also requires you to guard what He has entrusted to you. Your spirit is not something to be left exposed. Your anointing is not something to be handled casually. And your calling is not something you can afford to dilute. Everything you consume emotionally, mentally, spiritually, either strengthens what God is building or weakens it. Guarding your spirit begins with awareness. You must be honest about what affects you. Some conversations drain you even if they sound harmless. Some environments feel familiar but leave you heavy afterward. Some content entertains you while quietly shifting your values. These things may not be sinful on the surface, but they are subtle leaks. And leaks don't destroy you all at once. They drain you over time. Chosen ones pay attention to what leaves them empty, distracted, or spiritually dull. Preserving your anointing requires intentional separation, not isolation, but discernment. You can love people without absorbing their patterns. You can show compassion without sharing in dysfunction. But that balance only works when boundaries are firm. Anointing flows best through vessels that are clean, focused, and disciplined. When you expose yourself to everything, you weaken your sensitivity. And when sensitivity is lost, direction becomes blurred. Protection also involves what you allow into your mind. Repeated exposure shapes perception. What you watch, listen to, and meditate on becomes the lens through which you interpret life. Chosen ones cannot afford to feed on constant negativity, lust, bitterness, or mockery and expect to remain clear. Your mind is a gate, and not everything deserves entry. Discernment is not about fear, it is about stewardship. Your calling demands consistency. You cannot be spiritually sharp one day and careless the next and expect stability. Guarding your spirit is a daily practice, not a one-time decision. It is choosing prayer over panic, wisdom over impulse, and obedience over convenience. These choices don't always feel dramatic, but they are powerful. They compound over time and create spiritual endurance. There will be moments when lowering your guard feels easier, when blending in seems safer, when compromise looks small. But small compromises accumulate. They weaken conviction, dull discernment, and slowly erode authority. What once required effort to resist becomes easy to tolerate. That is why chosen ones must remain alert, not paranoid, but intentional. Awareness keeps you aligned without making you anxious. Your anointing is not just for you. It is meant to impact others, often in ways you may never see. When you guard it, you are protecting future conversations, future breakthroughs, and future lives. When you neglect it, the loss extends beyond you. That is why obedience is serious for those who are assigned. Your private discipline affects public outcomes. Protecting your calling also means honoring rest, reflection, and renewal. Burnout weakens discernment just as much as sin does. When you are exhausted, you are more vulnerable. Guarding your spirit includes knowing when to pause, step back, and allow God to refill you. Strength is not endless output, it is sustainable obedience. Chosen ones understand that they cannot consume everything and remain effective. They choose carefully, they filter intentionally, they protect consistently, not out of fear, but out of reverence for what God has placed inside them. And that careful stewardship is what allows their calling to endure, grow, and remain effective in a world that constantly demands access to what was never meant to be shared carelessly. Not every invitation is a blessing, and not every open door is sent by God. Some opportunities look harmless, sound logical, and even feel familiar, yet they are carefully disguised tests designed to pull you backward. The danger is that these tests rarely announce themselves as traps. They come wrapped in comfort, convenience, and confirmation bias. They appeal to your emotions, your history, and sometimes even your good intentions. And if you are not discerning, you can mistake familiarity for permission. There are voices that sound supportive but are subtly misaligned. They don't tell you to abandon God outright. They simply encourage you to relax your standards. They say things like, you don't have to be that serious, or God understands, or just this once won't matter. What they are really doing is negotiating your obedience. And obedience is never meant to be negotiated. The moment you start bargaining with conviction, you've already stepped onto dangerous ground. Some distractions come dressed as opportunities. They look productive, profitable, and promising, but they quietly drain your focus from what God actually assigned you to do. Not everything that advances your platform advances your purpose. Not everything that pays you is meant to keep you. Some doors open to test whether you value progress more than alignment, and chosen ones must learn that timing without calling is still disobedience. The enemy rarely attacks what you don't value. He studies what matters to you and tailors his approach accordingly. If you value peace, he sends chaos disguised as excitement. If you value growth, he sends shortcuts. If you value connection, he sends counterfeit relationships. These things aren't evil on the surface, they are simply misaligned. And misalignment is enough to derail destiny if left unchecked. Familiarity is one of the most subtle traps. Old environments can feel safe because they are known, not because they are healthy. Old conversations can feel comforting because they remind you of who you were, not who you're becoming. And when life gets hard, the temptation is to return to what feels easy instead of pressing into what is right. But ease is not evidence of God's will. Sometimes the hardest path is the holiest one. Tests also come through urgency. You're told to decide quickly, act fast, or risk missing out. Pressure is used to bypass prayer. Fear of loss is used to override wisdom. But what is truly meant for you will not require you to abandon discernment to obtain it. God does not rush his chosen ones into decisions that compromise their spirit. Anything that demands immediate agreement without spiritual clarity deserves careful scrutiny. There are invitations that flatter your ego while weakening your discipline. They affirm your gift, but ignore your character. They celebrate your talent, but dismiss your boundaries. And if you accept them, you may gain applause while losing authority. Chosen ones are not just gifted, they are guarded. And guarding requires saying no to things that others say yes to without hesitation. Discernment is not suspicion. It is sensitivity. It is the ability to feel when something is off, even when everything looks right. It is knowing when to walk away from something good because it is not God. And that discernment grows sharper when you value obedience more than approval. The higher you go, the more refined your judgment must become, because distractions at higher levels look convincing, respectable, and justified. That is why not every open door should be walked through, not every invitation should be accepted, and not every familiar voice should be trusted. Some are not sent to advance you, but to test whether you're willing to protect what God placed inside you.